strongly support Neil Gorsuch for the United States Supreme Court. First, there's no question that Judge Gorsuch is qualified for this job. He served as a law clerk for two Supreme Court justices, Byron White, Anthony Kennedy. He's also had a distinguished career in the public sector. And finally, of course, he worked in the Office of the Attorney General and worked in the Justice Department and had a great reputation there as well. And of course, in 2006, not that long ago, he came here to the floor of the United States Senate to be confirmed to the 10th Circuit. And guess what? He was unanimously confirmed by this body. In fact, at the time, Senator Hillary Clinton voted to confirm him. Senator Joe Biden voted to confirm him. Senator Barack Obama voted to confirm him. And by the way, so did a number of Democrats who are currently serving in the United States Senate. Not a single senator objected. Why? Because the guy is so well qualified. Since then, in his 10 years on the circuit court, his record has shown that he is fair, he's independent, and he's a consensus builder, which, only ratified what the Senate had done. It showed that, in fact, he was the kind of person who represents us well in the court. By the way, he's also a guy who knows how to find common ground. Listen to these numbers. 97% of the cases he has decided were unanimous decisions with the other two judges on the panel. Typically, as you know, these are judges who have been appointed by presidents who are Republican and Democrats. Finally, he's been in dissent less than 2% of the time. So this is a guy who 97% unanimous, 2% of the time he's in dissent. And by the way, of the more than 180 opinions he's written as a judge, 180 opinions, only one has been appealed to the United States Supreme Court from the Circuit Court. And by the way, that one was affirmed. So this is a guy who clearly knows how to build a consensus, bring people together, and that's needed right now. It's needed in this body, it's needed in our country as a whole, and it's certainly needed in the judiciary. By the way, it doesn't surprise me that he's a consensus builder. You think about it, he was a law clerk for Justice Byron White and Justice Anthony Kennedy. They're both known famously as being consensus builders and being able to bring together disparate opinions to try to find a decision at the Supreme Court level. So he's seen it up close and personal. He knows how to do it. Mr. President, I would say, though, in terms of this debate we're having, it's not just about Neil Gorsuch. And it's not just about another seat, as important as it is, on the United States Supreme Court. It's also an opportunity, by voting for Neil Gorsuch, to ensure that we have reestablished the proper role of this body, of the legislative branch, and of the judicial branch in our system of government. Judge Gorsuch understands that his job as a judge is not to impose his views on people, but rather to apply the law as written. Apply the law as written. That's kind of a basic part of our Constitution. He put it well in his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He said, a judge who likes every outcome he reaches is likely a very bad judge. What do you mean by that? I think what he meant is he doesn't believe in substituting his personal views for what he's supposed to do as a judge. So you may not like the decision, but you're constrained by the Constitution, by the laws, and that's what judges should do. He went on to say, it's not about politics, the job of a judge. He said, quote, if judges were just secret legislators declaring what the law, not what the law is, but what it should be, the very idea of government by the people and for the people would be at risk. I think he's right about that. It's not about what he wants. It's what the Constitution and the laws say. Judges should not legislate from the bench. That's not their job. Judge Gorsuch and I met recently, and he's met, I think, about 80 of my 100 colleagues here on the floor of the Senate, and he's talked to them about his views privately. And I was very impressed with him. I was impressed with him as a person, his background, his family. I was impressed with his approach I was talking about, where he says he's not going to substitute his own personal views. He basically said to me what he said in public. He's going to uphold the law as written, even if his personal beliefs would have led him to vote against that law if he had been in my position as a legislator. I think that's what you want in the court. But don't take my word for it. Judge Gorsuch also has earned the respect of lawyers and judges across the spectrum. Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School, who is an advisor to former President Obama and to previous Democratic presidents, has said that Judge Gorsuch is, quote, a brilliant, terrific guy who would do the court's work with distinction, end quote. That's Lawrence Tribe. Neil Katyal, who was President Obama's acting Solicitor General, so a guy who knows a thing or two about arguing before the Supreme Court, because that's what the Solicitor General does with a lot of his time, he has said that Judge Gorsuch's record, quote, should give the American people confidence that he will not compromise principle to favor the president who appointed him. He's a fair and decent man. Again, this is the acting Solicitor General for President Obama. Yet this debate is about something bigger than that even. It's about Neil Gorsuch, it's about his character, his experience, and his judgments, but it's also about something, I think, even more important than this division of powers in our Constitution. It's about the rule of law itself. What does it mean? And why does that matter? It matters because laws are an expression of the will of the people. The Constitution itself starts off with the idea, of course, that we the people, establish this Constitution, not we the Congress or we the government. We the people govern ourselves. And the government is the servant of the people and under our Constitution, not the other way around. When judges try to change the law rather than apply the law, they make themselves into an unelected legislative body. That's not just arrogant, by the way. I think that's unfair, not because it steals legitimate authority from us, the elected representatives in Congress, but because it steals that authority and silences the voices of the people who elected us. And ultimately, that's what this is all about. In this republic, Congress writes the laws, the President ensures the laws are faithfully executed, and the courts apply the law in our Constitution to specific cases that come before them. That's how it should work. That's how our founders intended it. I think it's more important now than ever to have a Supreme Court that understands this role and resists the urge to act as a super legislature. In recent decades, the court's been increasingly asked to decide a lot of important matters that affect us all. Think about it. Health care, the Affordable Care Act is an example, immigration, energy, environmental policies, social policies, First Amendment rights to free speech, freedom of religion, Second Amendment rights, 100 other issues. The court affects all of our lives in ways that are fundamental, and rulings by the court, of course, cannot be appealed to a higher court. All you can do is change the law, and on constitutional provisions, you can't even do that. So at the same time as the scope of this judicial power has expanded and as the significance of the Supreme Court rulings have increased, there are some judges who have essentially rewritten statutes that don't suit them. They have taken the laws and said, we're going to rewrite this in a way that we think works better. That's not their job. One example I'd give you is that a couple years ago, the Supreme Court ruled, for example, that the words, and I quote, established by a state, this was in the Affordable Care Act, could also mean not established by a state. I mean, literally, the court said that. And that legislature could also mean, and legislation, a popular referendum. So they took the very words of a statute and said, you know, we don't like the way that's written. We're going to change these words, and we're going to adjudicate this matter based on our understanding of these words, which is based on our personal opinion. I don't think these rulings made sense logically, but more importantly, they changed the laws written by the people and the people's representatives. So the stakes are high here. We've got to get this right. There are people who make the argument that the Constitution is such a living document whose meaning evolves as popular opinion evolves, that we should make judges into basically pollsters or super legislators. I don't think that makes sense. But more importantly, again, I don't think it's fair. And it's one reason why so many people have felt like their voices aren't being heard, I believe, when the courts do that. But again, Neil Gorsuch gets it. As he said in testimony recently, his philosophy is, and I quote, to strive to understand what the words on the page mean and to apply what the people's representatives, the lawmakers, have done, end quote. This should be what we all want in a Supreme Court justice, someone who will fairly and impartially apply the law and protect the rights we have guaranteed by our Constitution. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I would make a plea today. I would say that in this regard, I would think Judge Gorsuch is exactly the kind of justice that you would like. Someone that's actually going to apply the laws that you write, that we write, and not impose his personal views. The American Bar Association, not known as a conservative body, has unanimously declared Judge Gorsuch well qualified for this job. That's their highest rating, well qualified. That's what they've given him. The ABA has noted that, quote, based on the writings, interviews, and analyses we scrutinized to reach our rating, we discerned that Judge Gorsuch believes strongly in the independence of the judicial branch of government, and we predict that he will be a strong but respectful voice in protecting it, meaning the independence of the judicial branch. That's pretty strong from the American Bar Association. By the way, in spite of these accolades he's gotten and this respect for the lawmaking that so many of us do here in this body, some of my colleagues on the other side may decide to vote against Judge Gorsuch. They certainly have the right to do that. Of course they do. But let's at least give him a vote. Let's give him an up or down vote. He deserves that. If a nominee this qualified can't get an up or down vote on the Senate floor, it's not clear to me who could. Some have argued recently that the standard for a Supreme Court justice should be 60 votes in the Senate, not an up or down vote, not 51 votes, a simple majority. By the way, the Washington Post has looked at that recently, and the Washington Post gave that notion that it should be 60 votes 3 Pinocchios. That means, you know, the guy whose nose gets longer when he's not telling the truth. Here's what the Washington Post said, quote, "There is no traditional 60-vote standard or rule for Supreme Court nominations, no matter how much or how often Democrats claim otherwise," end quote. That's the Washington Post. In fact, as you know, probably 2 sitting justices on the Supreme Court right now were actually confirmed by this body with less than 60 votes. Justice Thomas, a very controversial nomination at the time, was confirmed 52 to 48. Hardly a tradition of requiring 60 votes. Justice Alito was confirmed 58 to 42 only 10 years ago. In fact, as we have heard on this floor, there has never been a successful partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court justice in the history of this body. So that's hardly the standard. So look, I urge my colleagues to give Judge Gorsuch a chance. Give him a vote. And I hope the result will be a confirmation of this smart, mainstream, decent man who is so well qualified for the Supreme Court and who has made it clear, again, he's not going to impose his personal beliefs on the rest of us, but instead he's going to apply the law as written. He's going to adhere to the United States Constitution. That's certainly the kind of judge I believe deserves the support of all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.